afraid of the dark.
Hello, dear listeners. I appreciate your attention and support. It helps me to continue to delight you with new stories. Today, I will tell a real story that will make you think before you go camping. And you will also learn about some of the unexplained things that happen to people while camping outdoors. Enjoy listening. On the afternoon of May 6, 2008, a 54-year-old man named Ricky Williams stood on the riverbank, casting his line into the waters of Dismal Creek in Western Virginia. Ricky hoped to catch some fish to alleviate his hunger, but after 30 minutes of fishing, there were still no bites. Normally, Ricky enjoyed fishing for hours, but today was different. He and his dog, who accompanied him, were growing increasingly hungry as their food supply dwindled during their weeks-long camping trip in the woods. As Ricky continued to fish, he couldn't help but recall the Appalachian Trail, a famous 2,200-mile trail known for its community of hikers who help each other. Ricky hoped that a passing hiker might offer him some food. However, as time passed, no hikers appeared, and Ricky's dog began to sense something in the woods. Suddenly, Ricky heard a voice approaching from behind him. He felt a mix of excitement and unease. Despite his frail appearance, Ricky was aware of past murders in the area and remained cautious. Eventually, a man in his early 30s named Scott Johnston emerged from the woods. Ricky felt relieved to see him and hoped for assistance. Scott introduced himself and explained that he was camping nearby with a friend. He generously offered Ricky some food from his supplies, including energy bars and chips, and even provided fresh bait for fishing. Ricky and Scott spent the next few hours fishing together, and their luck improved as they began catching fish. After fishing, Scott invited Ricky to join them for dinner at their campsite. Grateful for the invitation, Ricky accepted, and they packed up to head back. However, when Scott's fishing line got tangled, he urged Ricky to go ahead while he sorted it out. Upon reaching the campsite, Ricky encountered Scott's friend Sean, who appeared intimidating due to his size. Sean seemed hostile at first, but Scott reassured Ricky and introduced Sean as his friend. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Ricky took a seat by the campfire. As Scott and Sean prepared the fish, Ricky tried to engage in conversation to ease his nerves. However, he sensed that the men viewed him strangely and regretted sharing personal details about his life. When dinner was ready, they ate in silence, and Ricky grew eager to leave. After thanking Scott and Sean for their hospitality, Ricky quickly departed with his dog, feeling relieved to be away from the unsettling encounter. After Ricky and his dog had walked maybe 10 or 15 feet away from the campsite, two things happened in rapid succession. First, Ricky suddenly stopped and turned around, looking back at the campsite. Second, right as he did this, there was an enormous bang sound, like a small explosion echoing through the forest. Now, if you're not listening to our show called Run Fool, then you're really missing out on a truly special and unique podcast. It's technically a horror podcast, but honestly, it's so much more. Every episode offers a fresh take on terrifying lore, like a modern ghost story wrapped up in a tightly spun narrative. Run Fool, a Ballin Studios podcast, always delivers big plot twists or reveals at the end. Rodney Barnes, the iconic host, creates fully immersive horror experiences with expert-level sound design. Even if you've never watched the show, tune in just to hear Barnes' soothing radio voice. About 30 minutes later, and roughly 4 miles away from where Ricky, Sean, and Scott had been, two women were in their house eating dinner when they heard frantic knocking on their front door. Living in an isolated area, the women were alarmed. One rushed to the phone to prepare to call the police, while the other cautiously approached the front of the house. Peering out the window, they couldn't see anything in the darkness. Despite their concerns, they unlocked the door slightly, revealing a man covered in blood, as if he'd been fully submerged in it. The sight nearly made one of the women faint. The injured man, barely coherent, muttered something about Dismal Creek before collapsing. The women called 911, and moments later, an ambulance and police cars arrived. Meanwhile, police officers were speeding towards Dismal Creek, prompted by the mention of the location during the 911 call. On their way, they encountered a truck speeding towards them, which eventually crashed into an embankment. Suspicious of the driver's actions, the police approached the wreck cautiously. They found the driver, Ricky Williams, alive but injured. As they investigated, they discovered his real identity, Randall Lee Smith, the infamous murderer from years past. Upon reaching Dismal Creek, the police found a campsite belonging to Randall, filled with unsettling items. A cassette tape played Eerie chants, while a birth certificate revealed his true identity. Circles on a map indicated various locations, including Dismal Creek. The police speculated on possible victims, but DNA analysis yielded no matches. Randall's motives remained unclear, but back at the campsite, Ricky, now revealed as Randall, had attacked Sean and Scott. Despite their injuries, both survived and sought help from the nearby house. Randall's violent outburst stunned those who encountered him. Ultimately, Randall died in police custody, taking his secrets with him. Today, Sean and Scott have recovered from their injuries and continue to visit Dismal Creek. Randall's actions remain a mystery, leaving behind a legacy of fear and uncertainty. This story happened to me in my childhood. At that time, we lived in the area near military garrisons. The nature in those parts was incredibly beautiful, rich, and diverse, including nature reserves, parks, and disappearing species of plants and animals. Magnificent landscapes, a combination of colors and textures, rocky banks of mountain rivers, originating somewhere in the taiga and gaining speed rapidly, their watercourses rushing down into the valley, forming transparent pools of cold water, green coniferous trees with fragrant resinous cones against the backdrop of hills, all complemented by the purest air. Many people would venture out into nature, and it was something commonplace. One sunny day, a group of school children, including high school students and 2 teachers, went on a day trip without spending the night. As we left the garrison, we walked along the river the whole time. Its bed was wide, and the practically rocky banks were covered with water. One particular place stood out to me, where the river approached a sheer rocky slope of a hill. Somewhere upstream, branches branched off from the river, with a width of the stream no more than 3 meters, and our path led through such a branch, which had dried up, leaving only a rocky bottom. The path was short, but when we approached closer, we found that the stream had resumed its flow, and the water was rushing with such force that it was difficult for adults to cross, let alone school children. It would have swept them away. A caring person had placed a log nearby, wide enough not to fall into the water. After crossing to the other side, we began to set up camp. While the older students were pitching tents and building a fire, someone suggested playing hide and seek, and everyone agreed with joy. I remember that I ran off just a few steps and hid behind a tree. I stood there, and no one found me, not to mention hearing voices. It got boring, so I came out from behind the tree and headed towards the camp, walking for quite a while. No tents, no people. Thinking that I might have turned in the wrong direction, I turned back and reached the river, dried up, and opposite was the rocky slope of the hill. Slowly, a sense of fear began to creep in from somewhere below. A chill ran down my spine. My heart started pounding. I started analyzing that I couldn't have gotten lost because I had only left the camp for a short time. And then, something dark flickered from behind the neighboring bushes and hid behind them. At that moment, fear gripped me by the throat. My heart was pounding, and I suddenly turned around, full of determination. Knowing exactly where I was going, I quickly gathered myself in stressful situations and headed towards the camp. Strangely enough, I immediately came out to our spot. I was relieved. My hands trembled from tension. For some reason, the older students started extinguishing the fires and packing up the tents. They didn't talk to me. They turned away. My things were lying unpacked. And then I realized that it was already getting dark. It turns out that I had been absent for several hours. They had searched for me throughout the forest, had already lost all hope, and the rest was irreparably spoiled. And then I emerged from the forest with a smile on my face, asking why they hadn't searched for me. I didn't tell anyone anything then, as I didn't quite understand what had happened, and I also didn't want to remember anything or anyone beyond the bushes. The fear didn't go away. I still can't understand what it was, because according to my calculations, I was absent for no more than 15 minutes.